What skills are good in Pathfinder 2nd edition? Which ones are they? And if you don't pick the right skills, are you just skilling your build softly? Hey, that one almost made sense. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd edition. In this video chapter, I'm creating another tier list, ranking each of the skills in Pathfinder 2e by their usefulness in my opinion. This is to give new players a hand when they just want a quick list of which skills are generally useful and which ones are a little bit more niche. Usually in PF2e, you'll pick one or two skills to kind of specialize in and potentially build a character around. So ultimately, every skill in this list is conceivably useful for a particular build. But this tier list isn't about class-specific picks, it's about ranking every skill in PF2e based on general usefulness so newer players know which ones are worth paying attention to. Of course, like all tier lists, this one is entirely opinion-based, and I guarantee anyone and everyone listening will have differing opinions on where each and every skill should go. If you find this video chapter helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, joining as a member, or checking out my Patreon. I really appreciate the support. But let's get stuck in. Use performance to start the music. Okay, as I said in my intro, I'm trying to list off all the skills that are going to be generally useful for most characters in this system. That is quite hard to do because all of the builds in PF2e can be incredibly varied, so this tier list will involve a lot of generalization. TLDW, all skills are useful, but some are more broadly available to use. And as skill feats are an integral part of PF2e, I will be considering how good these feats are for each skill, and this will absolutely affect my overall ranking for said skill. A skill that has potentially game-changing feats will be generally higher on my list. The other thing is, as I briefly mentioned in the intro, you can actually build an entire character concept around certain skills. And if a skill is good enough to be built around, I think that should influence where it goes on this list, at least to a certain extent. So consideration will be given to skills that are so good that entire character ideas can be built using them. Lastly, I'm going to be mentioning a lot of skill actions in this tier list, so I do recommend you check out my 5 fabulous skill actions video and probably my more fabulous skill actions video if you haven't watched them yet, as they both go over a lot of these skill actions. This tier list will be listed from S being the most useful to D being the least useful, and we're going alphabetically. So, from the top. Acrobatics is regularly confused with athletics in a way. I have had many a player asking me if they can use acrobatics to jump when athletics is usually the one that you would use for such cases. Rules as written, however, acrobatics is meant for things such as balancing, how well you can stop yourself from taking fall damage, and how good you are at squeezing and tumbling through foes. It also has some uses in there for people who have a fly speed. Sadly, almost all the flight in the system comes around level 9-ish, so acrobatics is not going to be useful to you if you're focusing on flight until the sort of rough latter half of the game. However, there's also quite a few classes that can make some incredible use out of acrobatics, more specifically, what I mentioned prior, tumbling through enemies. Rogues and swashbucklers, for example, can gain benefits for doing these actions, and thus that does kind of make acrobatics a little more useful. And there's going to be times when you're just going to end up falling on your bum, and having a few skill feats in acrobatics is going to be helpful there, such as having catfall, as it scales incredibly well. Also, kip up is just cool AF. The only thing about acrobatics that I'm not a big fan of is it being dex-based, which is kind of specific for a lot of classes and not specific for a lot of others. So while generally you're going to get some use out of acrobatics, not every class is going to actually use it, maybe at all. So I'm going to throw acrobatics into A for amazing. Next up. Arcana is probably one of the more useful magical options for skills out there. A lot of the time, you can basically rule that most magical things can be explained via Arcana checks. Specific types of magic usually override this, but I think a lot of GMs would still allow Arcana checks with maybe a slightly higher DC. With that said, most of the magic skills in PF2e are somewhat interchangeable, at least when it comes to skill feats. Quick Identification and Trick Magic Item, for example, can be used with all magic skills. Oh, and Trick Magic Item is an excellent feat, by the way, for non-spellcasters. Arcana does come with Arcane Sense as a skill feat, which gives you a free cantrip to detect magic, which is kind of cool for a skill feat. And Arcane is the only magical skill, as far as I'm aware anyway, with Unified Theory at level 15 as a skill feat that allows you to use Arcana instead of Nature, Occultism, or Religion for skill checks, and it removes that DC increase too, which is kind of ridiculously powerful. So Arcana is going to go in A, I think, alongside Acrobatics. Moving onwards. Athletics is kind of 100% necessary for any character that wants to use feats of strength. It's used for jumping, lifting things, swimming, grabbing, climbing, and any role-playing moments that require your strength, your GM will call for an athletics check. And for any build that wants to use grab or trip to annoy the crap out of your enemies and the GM too, Titan Wrestler is basically an essential skill feat to grab, as you will definitely be fighting a lot of bigger enemies as you level up in PF2e. Plus, leaping can be really strong, especially if you have feats like quick jump and powerful leap. You can practically ignore difficult terrain with these sorts of skill feats. Also, wall jump, water sprint, and cloud jump are just kind of ridiculously cool. Granted, athletics isn't going to work so well for people who don't intend to use strength at all in their character builds, but for everyone who's just pumping a couple of points into strength as you level, it's extremely worth it, even just for things like lifting heavy objects, etc. And considering there's going to be a lot of exploration situations where athletics is going to be called for, like climbing up and down a rope or whatever, I think that's going to put athletics into the S tier for Supreme. Let's keep going. Crafting is one of those skills that people don't tend to pick up, but it has quite a lot of use cases. If you ever want to craft anything, obviously, or repair things, or even just identify a lot of stuff, crafting is going to be your go-to skill. And if you're ever looking to transfer runes without having to pay a merchant, then you're going to want to grab the magical crafting feat, so you can deal with that. Also, I really love quick repair because it turns a 10-minute activity into a one-action one when you become legendary in it, which is kind of ridiculous. And if signature crafting isn't one of the coolest feats in the system, then I don't know what is. Seriously, look at how cool some of these quirks actually are. Though maybe I'm not the sort of person that should be judging whether something is cool or not, considering I'm a YouTube content creator. Crafting does have a bunch of other really cool skill feats, but I'll leave this one here, and I would throw crafting into the A tier for those who are dedicated, but I think generally it's going to go into the B tier for balanced. Onwards to the next skill. Deception is one of those skills that a lot of players aren't going to think is all that useful until they look at certain skill actions like create a diversion or feint. It is charisma based, which obviously can be a bit of an issue, but if you want to play as a ranged character and you want enemies to be off guard to give you an effective +2 to your hits, you might want to consider investing a few points into charisma and grab training in deception and start creating a diversion. And of course, just straight up bullshitting people can be very useful indeed, like how I convinced you all that I actually know what I'm talking about. Sadly, there aren't a great deal of really good deception skill feats. Lie to Me can be quite good if you're pumping full points into deception, and the level 15 skill feat Reveal Machination sounds really cool too, though it's rare, but otherwise there's not a great deal of good ones. If not for the fact that feint and create a diversion exist, this probably would have been C tier, but instead we're going to chuck it into B tier. Onwards to the next skill. Diplomacy is one of those skills that is going to come up time and time again, whether it's negotiating lower prices from merchants or simply trying to talk your way out of a difficult situation. Diplomacy is just kind of really good. And of course, the skill feat Bon Mot is very helpful for certain spellcasters. You don't have to be a spellcaster to take Bon Mot, but you could take it to help out your spellcasters. Plus, getting to insult an enemy in the middle of a fight, so much so that it lowers the will saves and perception, is pretty funny. And I do like the Evangelize skill feats that basically causes a listener to lose their mind a little bit and they actually become stupefied. Imagine being able to talk so much bollocks that you confuse people. Kind of like when people try to explain cryptocurrency to me. Also, if you're using the stamina variant rule, then encouraging words is practically essential, and it's really cool being able to heal someone with diplomacy. Because of these reasons, and I'm sure many more, I'm going to throw diplomacy into S tier. Let's keep on rolling with skills. If you're going to roll, I think it requires an acrobatics check. Okay, yeah, I'll shut up. Intimidation is quite intimidating. Well, it's not, but if someone shouts intimidation at you, you might be a little bit scared, though that might just because they sound crazy more than anything. Now, if you ever intend to demoralize a creature with intimidation, which is honestly a fantastic thing to do for like every build in the entire system, you're going to need some points in intimidation and preferably some points in charisma as well. You're also almost definitely going to want to pick up intimidating glare and or intimidating prowess, depending on if you're building a strength-based character or not. Plus, battle cry is just really cool. Getting a free intimidation check when you start a fight is awesome. And I do really like Too Angry to Die, where you just stand up and shout at someone and they poop themselves. And of course, we cannot forget Scare to Death, which is exactly as it sounds, and it's absolutely ludicrous. Intimidation in general is just a really good skill to have because Demoralize is so strong. The Frightened condition lowers all of your stats and DCs by 1 or 2 if you critically succeed in scaring the crap out of someone. The downside to Intimidation is obviously the charisma requirement, and there's quite quite a lot of creatures in PF2e that are immune to like fear and mental effects. Plus, Intimidating Strike does exist for certain classes, so I think Intimidation is going to go into A tier. Now, the next one is a little bit confusing. So, lore skills are kind of difficult to throw under a single umbrella, but I'm going to give it a go. These generally are quite narrow in their subject matter, but by using one, generally the DC is lowered for the skill check by around 2. So, for example, if you have architecture lore and you want to know when this building was built, everyone else who doesn't have that lore skill is probably going to have to roll something like crafting or society, but you get to roll your lore skill and the DC will be lower for you. And of course, these particular lore skills are not all listed in the system itself. There's a bunch of them explained in player core, but you can effectively have them on incredibly specific topics if you want, such as having good lore on, I don't know, feathers, for example, or maybe you're really good at recognizing certain cloud patterns. You can really be as specific as you want to be, usually relevant to your backstory. Funnily enough, there's actually some skill feats in here that ask for specific lore skills. Warfare lore is probably one of the best ones to have, because if you grab a battle planner at level 2, you can use that particular lore skill to roll initiative. And of course, there's a few other lore skill feats in here. Some of them are okay, some of them are kind of niche, and overall I'd say that lore skills are probably incredibly specific. And while generally the lore skills probably sound a little bit mid, there's some that are incredibly strong, like bardic lore or esoteric lore. However, these are very specifically class-based features that you gain. It's not really something you can invest in as anyone. Because of the hyper-specificity, I'm probably going to put lore into the C tier for conditional. Next on our journey. Medicine is absolutely one of the most useful skills in the whole system. You're pretty much going to need one character in your party to take medicine unless someone has Lay on Hands or Hymn of Healing, Garden of Healing, etc. Basically very specific focus spells. This is because in between fights you're going to want to treat wounds for all of your party members, as you're really meant to be healed more or less to max when you start each encounter, and there's no real reason not to be, unless of course you want to TPK. On top of that, battle medicine is just kind of fantastic and anyone can take it so long as they're trained in medicine. If you're wearing your healer's toolkit when you have battle medicine, it effectively makes it a one action ability so long as you have a hand free, which is incredibly strong because it can heal for 2d8, and on a crit that's 4d8 at level 1. The downside to battle medicine is that it can only be done on one person every 24 hours, but that is per person that has used it. Someone's only immune to your battle medicine, not someone else's, so if everyone in your group all just grabbed one trained proficiency rank in medicine, then grabbed battle medicine at level 2 as their skill feats, you could all heal each other once every day in the middle of a fight for one action, which I think is kind of fantastic. Then there's Ward Medic, which lets you heal more than one person at once, and this scales up with your proficiency. Continual Recovery is pretty good, which allows you to keep treating someone without having to wait an hour in between those treat wounds checks. Risky Surgery is just fantastic. It turns successes into crit successes, though you have to give someone a quick stab before you get that success, which is hilarious and brilliant. Medicine is just a phenomenal skill in the system and is practically required that at least one person has it. And there's going to be a lot of checks generally that are going to be medicine based, whether it's illnesses or looking at bodies or that sort of thing. It's just generally a very useful skill to have. So this is absolutely being thrown into S tier. Let's keep going with Nature. If you want to hug trees and you want them to hug you back, this is the one for you, I guess. Like Arcana, Occultism, and Religion, this is another magic skill. However, you do get a few little benefits with regards to animals and the like when you take Nature. The problem with that is that you're just probably better off grabbing the Beastmaster dedication rather than having to grab one or two skill feats to be able to tame and train an animal as like a pet or whatever. It's just not massively useful. I just generally think a lot of the feats in Nature aren't all that interesting. While it is good for recall knowledge checks, as most animals are obviously going to be nature-based, I just don't think it's super-duper useful with having so few non-niche skill feats and uses. I do think Arcana is better if you're looking for a magic skill to grab, so I'm going to throw Nature into C tier. Onwards and upwards. Occultism is certainly a thing. It's definitely one of the more obscure skills out there, however that does not mean that it isn't particularly good. I'd say it ranks a little bit lower than Arcana overall, but it's definitely useful for recall knowledge checks, with a decent chunk of enemy types like aberrations, etc. being occultism based, and it does get some rather intriguing skill feats. I personally love crystal healing because it just sounds ridiculous. Someone just putting some crystals on someone and it actually heals them is ridiculous and stupid, and I utterly adore it. Of course, trick magic item is here as well, as I mentioned with Arcana and I guess nature as well, and I absolutely love the level 10 feat comforting presence as a reaction. Your occult connection reduces fear and confusion that someone feels. Really interesting stuff. So I don't think it's quite as good as Arcana, but it's still pretty good one to have overall. So I'm going to throw this into B tier. On deck is... Performance is one of those skills that's very useful for very specific builds, but for everyone else, it's actually kinda garbage, and it's actually the worst skill on this list, in my opinion. Now, that's not to say that it's actually bad or anything, it's just that, as I said, if you're not one of the builds that can make use out of performance, you're basically never going to use it. Bard, for example, when it takes the Maestro subclass, is definitely going to be needing to throw some points into performance, and they're going to need it for the Fortissimo composition, which is one of the most powerful abilities in the entire system. I mean, giving everyone a potential +3 to attack rolls and damage rolls is utterly insane. But otherwise, it's honestly just not that good. Fascinating Performance, for example, as a level 1 skill feat would be good if the Fascinating condition wasn't complete toss. Also, the skill feat Juggle is in here, and that speaks for itself because juggling is pointless. I'm probably going to make a lot of enemies saying that, aren't I? I'm sorry, but it just is. It's juggling. So unless you're playing as a bard or you have any other sorts of builds that are going to be using performance, skip it. This is absolutely going in D tier for dog shit. Nah. D for deliberate, in that you really need to be deliberately picking skills here for them to be any good. Following that, we have... Religion is definitely going to be useful if your campaign has any undead in it, and let's face it, this is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game, it's going to have undead in it. Aside from recall knowledge checks for the aforementioned undead, Religion is still generally pretty useful. Again, trick magic item is here, but you can also grab the Battle Prayer skill feat, which is one action where you do a Religion check against the will DC of a foe within 30 feet, and you deal a teeny tiny bit of damage to them. I just kind of like this one. It's just kind of fun to just batter someone with Religion, sort of like throwing a Bible at them, but like a magical Bible that comes from the sky. On top of that, obviously any checks involving gods and the like, which obviously do come up quite often in these sorts of fantasy games, you're going to want to have a decent amount of religion in there. Again, I don't think it's quite as good as Arcana, but it's certainly better than nature. So into B tier, religion goes. The next shiny skill is... Society is a rather universal skill to have, at least when it comes to recall knowledge checks. First of all, pretty much all humanoids in this system require Society for you to learn more about their statistics. On top of that, if you want to learn anything about history, culture, and even stuff like city layouts, etc., you might want to take some points in Society. It's a rather useful skill to have, and I'd say at least one Society check is going to come up every session you play outside of recall knowledge checks. As for skill feats, Read Lips is kind of fun, Courtly Graces can be occasionally useful, Multilingual is just great to learn extra languages, and I do really like the level 15 legendary linguist that allows you to effectively talk to any creature regardless of language. Ultimately though, those recall knowledge checks on humanoids is going to serve you incredibly well in this system. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think recall knowledge is the most powerful skill action in the entire system, and when you're able to do it on the majority of creatures because you pump some proficiency ranks into Society, you're really going to feel that power. Thus, I think Society has got to be A tier. It's so close to S tier, but knowing history and stuff is cool, but not always super useful. Wait, what was that? Oh, it's the next skill. Stealth is probably another one of those skills that has quite a lot of uses if you pump points into it, but otherwise you'd be pretty much better off avoiding it almost entirely. It's definitely got more use cases than performance, but you really do need to be good at stealth to actually get some real use out of it. And aside from sort of scouting outside of combat, maybe following someone, it's not great in combat. And that's just because of how line of sight works in PF2e. Basically, if they have line of sight to you, it doesn't matter how well you're sneaking, they can see you. Stealth can definitely be useful for rogues, because if they use stealth for their initiative, then enemies are off guard to them if they go before them. And of course, just generally sneaking around, you know, as I said, following people, hiding in certain places can be really good outside of combat. But overall, I just don't think it's amazing. There's a lot of restrictions when using sneak to get some proper use out of it, and most of the skill feats are kind of meh. Using quiet allies plus follow the expert is actually really cool, I will say that. But as I already mentioned, you do have to pump a lot of points into stealth to get some use out of it, because you got to beat their perception DC, and if you're not very good at stealth, there's not a great chance that you're actually going to be able to do that. So I think stealth is going to be more of a B tier skill. Sliding into the next slot. Survival is one of those skills that I actually really like. However, it does require GMs such as myself who like to put a little bit of emphasis on the survival aspects of this system. I don't actually go crazy over the top, I just like survival to actually mean something, whereas in most campaigns you can just grab 7 days worth of rations and never even worry about that sort of stuff. So for my campaigns, survival is fantastic. Outside of survival-based campaigns or my campaigns, it's honestly not going to be massively useful to you. There are situations where it's going to come up and you can make a few justifications for using it in situations such as maybe tying ropes, which is probably usually a crafting check, maybe burning things that you could potentially use for survival, etc. But again, it's not going to be massively helpful. It's good to cover your tracks though, and for tracking creatures as well. That's all useful stuff. And as for skill feats, Forager's pretty good if you're in one of those survival campaigns, and there's a few skill feats in there that are good against like climate types or difficult terrain, etc. But there's nothing amazing in there in my opinion, due to how niche most of these situations are. This would be in D tier if not for the fact that you can use it to track enemies, because you're kind of going to be doing that sometimes. So that bumps it up to C tier for me. Last but not least, Thievery, for all the loot goblins / hated party members out there. Thievery is going to come up at least once in practically every dungeon. You got to deal with traps and you got to deal with locks, and Thievery is one of the best ways to deal with those. Of course, there are a few skill feats in there for stealing and the like, such as subtle theft, if that's the type of horrible person that you are, but otherwise it's not a ridiculously useful skill to have, but it's definitely going to be coming up somewhat regularly due to traps and locks existing. I think this one's a solid B tier, as I feel its use case is certainly balanced. And that's the end of my skills tier list. As I said in the intro, this list is entirely opinion based, though I do hope some people can get some use out of this with me being a rather experienced PF2e GM. And of course, please do let me know in the comments where you would have things different. To each their own, and I always like listening to people's opinions on this stuff. While I was writing this script, I literally changed most of my writings at least 3 times. Seriously, my opinions on these things change daily. But anyway, if you found this video chapter helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, joining as a member, or becoming a patron. Your support genuinely means the world to me. And a big shout out to archivists and members Max Magnus 20019, Aussie Smith, Shard and Sirakia, and patron and archivist Clash. Thanks so much for your support, guys. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominimi Nomicon, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.